name is Fred Shu from a company called D3. I've been part of the domain industry for probably about 23 years, mostly sort of on, a little bit off. I do have a presentation I'd like to share. Now, as Paul mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit more so from sort of the startup, sort of commercial end. We at D3 have been trying to be very thoughtful, intentional about working with the DNS since day one. Right around when we started the company, I believe it was around October 2022 during the last contracted parties meeting in LA. So D3, we have a global mission. It's to basically, we think, align pretty well with ICANN, is to increase accessibility, security, transparency, and to develop what we call these primitives, these Web2, Web3 primitives that will enable all kinds of usage, commerce, more domains being registered, more domains being renewed ultimately over time. So for some of you, and I know most of you are experts in this whole area, but for some of you who aren't as familiar with the domain industry and haven't been in it for 20 plus years, I wanted to give a little bit of a primer. Right, in the 90s, you can buy, pets.com. We know all about this. I think there was even a fax method to register these early names when I was frankly in high school. Then during the last GTLD round, there was XYZ, so you can buy another nice name like that. Prior to Google buying abc.xyz, which one of our co-founders had a hand in. And the 2026 round, which I'll call it 2026 plus, because as Paul mentioned, we're not sure exactly when it's going to come, but I do envision a world where there's going to be large Web3 communities also applying for and winning their generic TLDs or community TLDs. I go back to in a world where DNS is the global source of truth. It's in every browser, every phone, every ISP, therefore powers all of humanity. This is how we talk to our partners regularly about. And there's one thing on the slide I'll mention, which is wallet, right? And as Paul mentioned, RR type. Now as a public moniker we can use. And there's also kind of this concept of real world land value, or what we call in the Web3 world, RWA. I know it's a little bit of funny lingo, but there's a lot of those in Web3. So I will try my best to kind of interpret it for the audience here at large. Again, a primer. So coming from a domain guy myself, there's really only one domain. And then you have Web3 identifiers, or what we call alt roots. And I gotta apologize for the red light, stoplight. I don't mean to insult anybody's intelligence, but we like to make it very clear. One thing we believe is that it's all about education first, sort of enact any potential change, right? So DNS domains, as we all know, and regularly interact with on a normal basis, reaches most humans, 5 billion plus users. I believe Ram Mohan came up with a term called universal acceptance. So we're talking about universal compatibility out of the box without having to do anything special. We align really well with ICANN and the DNS system because it's ultimately about protecting users from malicious activity and IP rights, which we love. And it's trusted at scale. And it also has this governance body called ICANN around it. If you look into the Web3 identifier world, as Paul mentioned, there are some extensions like .888, .crypto, .eth. Name collisions on the top of our mind as much as anybody else, right? And compatibility issues, we think about this sort of like jailbreaking a phone. Imagine a world where you had to only speak with another party with one jailbroken phone, and the other side had to also have a jailbroken phone, and that's the only way you can interact. We don't think that's realistic, scalable, nor secure. Similarly to limited functionality, right? Social names, specialized apps, maybe some Web3 crypto wallets that perhaps trade crypto coins, Dogecoin, for example, that maybe do some resolution on it, but it's kind of limited, right? And also lack of technical depth. There's a lot of obscure APIs, wallets, various servers sitting in various homes, cloud machines all over the world. It's kind of like the Wild West. So my part here is to primarily educate first and foremost. So Web3 tried to create alt roots and they did fail. And I'll just basically add a little bit more detail over here, right? D3.eth doesn't work in your browser. It may at some point, 10 years from now, when Ethiopia agrees perhaps, we don't know. Web3 identifiers, they're not really traded, right? There's no underlying value, just having an identifier. Don't get me wrong. I have a monkey JPEG, much like a lot of Web3 people do. I love monkey JPEGs. I call it a monkey JPEG or an NFT. I do not call it a domain name. These alt assets, we call them, are confusing to end users. I know some registrars that have sold some, also with a dot, causing a customer service nightmare, and therefore they ended up having to pull them. And what this results in is ecosystem fragmentation, which is not really good for anybody and certainly does not allow for mass adoption and innovation, which I'll talk about in a bit. So here's a QR code for you. I think Paul mentioned you can look at it, but there are, I think, 2 or 3 different dot wallets. If I'm a crypto user or Web3 user, or if I'm a Web2 user, and I see that my colleague or my friend has a dot wallet, and there's another person or human or bot across the world that also has another dot wallet, if I send money to that wallet, who gets it? We're talking about a real practical example, and one of the biggest use cases for crypto is easily being able to send money in a trusted fashion back and forth to various people, instead of a long crypto address that's 34 characters long, whether it's on Bitcoin network, Ethereum network, Solana network, what have you. A lot of what drives the future of crypto is these easy naming conventions that's easily human understandable in our approach to building this business. We're actually pretty excited about some standards that ICANN's coming out with, or the Octo is coming out with. We ourselves have proposed a draft with the IETF to standardize Web3 wallet mapping using the DNS. So in this example, all I'm trying to do, if I'm a recipient that owns a .com or even like a future .doge name, all I want to do is I want to specify my Web3 wallet address for maybe my Ethereum address. I want to put it in my DNS TXT record. The DNS TXT record is a standard. It's been around. DNS and DNSSEC has been around, I think, for 20 plus years. In short, it's a system. It's not broken. You don't need to fix it. Work with it and the standards that we are very happy to be seeing being developed to basically push forward mass adoption between this Web3, Web2 world. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about tokenization. This has been a topic that I've been trying to simplify down as much as I could. So tokenization, this is from Gartner directly. Tokenization refers to a process by which a piece of data or asset or livestock or whatever is replaced by a surrogate value known as a token. And we see this with RFID chips on, shipping containers. We see this with tagging the cute little livestock I see up here. Poor guy probably has a tough life with that all around, sleeping and such. But also oil and commodities markets. When I'm buying and selling, for example, a barrel of oil or an oil future, I'm not physically storing a barrel in my garage, right? I'm storing an electronic identifier that represents that oil. Similarly with a gold bar. All right, so this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about where the future opportunities may lie once we kind of create trust and an international standard, hopefully, right? We can then start unlocking and doing things like our attempt as a company to transform elements of the domain industry. We're doubling down on an area called what we call domain finance, or what we call DomainFi. And I wanted to kind of create a very simplified definition for you all. It's really simply the management of revenues and transactions with real domains, with real asset or observable market value, which I know all too well, have a ton of value, right? And the finances, again, orgs, individuals, companies, anytime you're talking about revenue and tracking finances, the world, at least in Web3, has created this short FI concept. So domain finance or DomainFi. The underpinning of this has been to, number one, modernize, introduce some of this blockchain technology and some of these core primitives into the ecosystem, right? So that you can insert, like I said, trust, enable things like low cost, fast transfer, and ultimately a lot of liquidity. So step 2 in this sort of view, just like with the livestock world, once you tag that cattle, you can better start trading and leveraging and seeing how much productivity they have, etc. Right? Monetization capabilities can then be built on top of these primitives. Right, so think about a world where one can borrow, trade, lend against their domain names, as opposed to creating kind of liquid or trapped equity where you can't really do anything with that value locked in that domain. And the third is building an innovation. So once we sort of establish these primitives and make it possible for people to do things like commoditization, there can and should be a healthy ecosystem of folks building on top of this open framework, much like millions of people build on AWS, or millions of people build on a certain programming language, right? Blockchains are an open system, and there's a lot of code behind the scenes, and much of it is open source. So we think about the next generation of registrars, registrants, applications built on top of this framework. And we're very excited about this. So our mission at D3, again, a little bit more on the commercially minded mindset. We were trying to expand the land on the internet by 2x, starting with these primitives, right? Once we unlock and enable all of Web3 liquidity to come in, all now I believe $3 trillion worth of Web3 post-Trump, we can better start increasing the composability, the ability to build these apps and run these apps, and ultimately, like I said, ownership, usage, and further adoption. Maybe there's a world where every human and their bots one day, or AI agents, have a domain name. This is very aligned with our model, and we believe ICANN as well. Last slide is, again, this new model where we want to build the new internet together. These blockchain features, these primitives, the ecosystem we're trying to build on top should be available for all registries, registrars, and registrants. The result of that's going to be improved discovery. When I started the domain industry, I think there was less than 120 million domain names back in early 2000s. Now that number has tripled, and we do believe that it can get the next 1 billion as long as we have an active global standard and healthy ecosystem on top. Speaking of that, to our ICANN members only, that we do have sort of some limited early participation programs. You can feel free to email me at fred@d3.email. Thank you. Yeah, from my point of view, the biggest usage right now I see, and it's not a lot, it's in Web3 wallets. Primarily if I'm just trying to send you crypto and I don't want to paste that big long string, I want to send it to maybe david.eth or something, vice versa. It's not like it's being used as frequently as a social handle like on X. Sure, I can expand a little bit more on that. I'm as concerned as you are, right? When we talk about another dot coffee, and I don't know if there's actually a dot coffee, but if a dot coffee did exist on the root, whether today or in 3+ years, that's the foundation. That's the hook into reality. It's the hook into the DNS system. As far as blockchain extending, if you remove a lot of the lingo, the way that it can and should be used by apps, in our opinion, is through the DNS. So through things like DNS TXT records, through standardized technologies that have long adopted standards. I cannot comment on other kind of not or alt systems. I will pull upon another example. New.net. I don't know how many people followed New.net from back in the day, but it was a project where I believe Idea Lab and Bill Gross created. The whole idea is instead of visiting Amazon.com, you would visit Amazon.com.net. Was an interesting idea, but ultimately it was classified as an alt-root system, and it died a slow, probably painful death from sometime between 2008 and 2012. In fact, I think I read somewhere that, and to your point as well, scary instances, it was deemed malware at one point, and some guy went to jail as a convicted felon for enabling a group of kids, I believe, to accidentally see some takeover content on an unauthorized machine having to do with porn. So that didn't help that alt-root system, and I do not believe that type of construct will be successful long-term for what we have coming up in blockchain and blockchain naming systems either. My view is call them Web3 identifiers until they become domain names. I know that that is a little counterintuitive, but just another example, Web3 domain itself, to me, is a little bit of an oxymoron. It's either a domain name that works on the DNS, or it's a monkey JPEG. If you think holistically, we got to think about a world where do people rule the blockchains, or do blockchains rule the people? I'm very much on the former. Blockchains can only be as useful and secure as they enable us to replicate real life use cases. So you mentioned things like forking, yes. Source of truth, yes. ICANN can and should be, at least in this namespace. I explained this to a lot of customers, partners, etc. Anything that has a dot is governed by these ICANN rules. The moment that some other civilization, either domestic or alien, starts adopting some other alternate namespace with a semicolon, with a hashtag or something, and it starts getting mass adoption, then great. That seems to be pretty clear to me outside of the DNS system's purview. But on the core technology side, there has to be functions that adhere to transfers, to UDRPs, to government and criminal investigations, right? And I think that a lot of the incentives in the Web3 world are not tied to kind of go there, unfortunately, yet. Yeah, I think until the jury is out on some of these standards as they relate to DNS, I think that maybe not whipsaw your constituents too much. Things like the RFC process, which is actually getting a review on the DNS Web3 wallet mapping thing that we're doing right now. We're also waiting to see if we can get further feedback on that before we preach to our constituents as well. So I think taking a measured, patient approach is probably going to be the right one.